The opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Cable 14, its sponsors, or its shareholders, Cogeco Cable, Shaw Cable, and Source Cable Limited.
And welcome to Council Edition for Wednesday, November the 21st. I'm Doug Farraway. From casino talk to one-way conversion to LRT and everything else that's going on in Ward 1, we welcome our guest, Brian McHattie. Good to have you back.
Thanks a lot, Doug.
Welcome aboard. I mentioned several subjects right off the top, but today we begin with the Line 9 conversion. And honestly, I hadn't heard of this, say, 5 months ago. Councillor Pasuta at that point in time said, well, nobody's talking about it out in my area. But that Enbridge application and the debate around it has certainly heightened over the last month or so. And I don't know how you summarize the hours of presentations and debate that went on this morning at GIC, but let's at least try. There was a motion and there was going to be a presentation by an Enbridge representative. So pick up the story from there. What happened today at GIC?
Yeah, Enbridge was there to speak to the General Issues Committee meeting today, and they had about 6 or 7 people, including a number of folks from Calgary, from their head office. So they took us seriously in terms of wanting to know more about their plans, and what they're working on is to reversing the flow of the pipeline, which generally heads west, to have it flow east instead, and to extend beyond Westover, which is the main terminal in Hamilton, all the way to Montreal, where the oil terminals are, or the refineries rather, to process the oil. So we talked about what type of crude oil they'll be flowing, what their safety plans are, what some of the concerns are.
Well, and we know that there have been incidents from the Gulf, which was entirely different, to the Kalamazoo pipe that burst, I believe, last year. And there were concerns. Is this the same kind of pipe, the same diameter of the pipe? And I guess, Brian, the larger issue here as well is we're getting away from the traditional movement of crude in this country, from the imports that used to come in through the Port of Montreal and then would be refined in Montreal or in Southern Ontario, to now using tar sands and moving it east to Montreal to be refined for the domestic and the international market. So things have changed. I mean, that pipeline's been running for 30-odd years through Greater Hamilton, but there are some nuances now that have changed, and I know a lot of those delegations were there today chatting about that.
That's right, Doug. The new application that Enbridge is getting into the National Energy Board, which will be into to the board by the end of November, we heard that today from Enbridge, will provide the option of flowing diluted bitumen from the oil sands right across the country and off to Montreal. So certainly through Hamilton, but through all the other municipalities as well on the way to that city, to Montreal. There's only one refinery left. There used to be 7 refineries in Montreal. There's only one left. It's a Suncor facility. There's one in Lévis across the river from Quebec City as well. So the 2 refineries in Quebec right now. Only the Suncor one has the capability of processing bitumen, and only to a small amount at this point in time. The big issue, the economics of this appears to be that the foreign oil coming from the Gulf and other places across the ocean is more expensive now than it would be to flow the oil from Edmonton, from Alberta. So it's an economics issue, and it's cheaper to flow through the pipeline right across the country from Alberta to Montreal and process it in Montreal. That's why we're seeing this.
In a previous life, and I know you still do all the reading, you're an environmentalist before you became a politician. It helped you get elected, frankly, in Ward 1. What are your personal thoughts about this? We're not going to go away from oil very soon in our culture. It still needs to move. It still needs to be refined because we're still consuming it. But this is a different kind of bitumen that we're talking about. And we are going to see our friends south of the border going into shale, going into a lot of environmentally sensitive places, and we know that the environmental record for the tar sands is not the best in the world. In fact, it might be on the top of the list of disasters in the world. Where are you coming from on this? How do you feel about there's just an awful lot of issues that go along with this in Westover?
That's right, Doug, and it's just like every one of these issues we deal with, it's not a zero-sum game. There are pluses and minuses on all sides, and I guess coming right down to the oil sands, you know, the greenhouse gas implications for producing oil sands oil. A barrel of oil sands costs all kinds of energy to actually produce that barrel. I forget the number, but it's 7 or 10 barrels or more of oil required to produce 1 barrel of oil sands oil. So it's very energy intensive that way. And the greenhouse gases are pretty scary when you look at the numbers. So that by itself is a challenge, and we have a climate change strategy here in Hamilton. We're trying to reduce our own greenhouse gases, so that's kind of contrary to our own principles and values here in Hamilton. But as you say, on the other hand, where else is the oil coming from? Is it coming from the Middle East, and what goes on over there to produce a barrel of oil and ship it across the ocean? Oil spills and all that sort of stuff. If you had to choose between the Northern Gateway pipeline, which heads out to the Pacific Northwest, an incredibly ecologically important area, or you had to choose to have this Enbridge pipeline go through Hamilton and Montreal and process the oil in Canada, Canadian jobs and all that sort of stuff, you'd be thinking about all those different parameters. So maybe if I was just an environmentalist back in those days, it would be a little more clear for me, but now as I sort of weigh all the pluses and minuses, and you look at the NDP federally, and I think they're actually supporting this, and their position is they're not supporting the Northern Gateway pipeline, you know, out to the Pacific Northwest. So, you know, they want jobs in Canada, and this does that.
An article that most people should read was from John Hondrick, who's the former publisher of the Toronto Star, and I think that kind of made up my mind that you don't want a pipeline and a shipping season going through Kitimat.
No.
You just don't want that.
No, that Douglas Channel, I've been out there. I've got a friend who does orca research, whale research out there. Visited him a couple of years ago, and that area is just pristine. And it's a fairly narrow channel. It's not that wide. Lots of room for stuff to go wrong. The BC ferry went down just off Gill Island a couple of years ago. And the significance of the spirit bears, you know, the Kermode white bears, white black bears that are there. And the marine ecosystem is incredibly important.
We better bring it back to Hamilton now before we solve all of our national and international issues. And one of the big debates, and of course it's gained steam, is the casino debate. Recently, the OLG chair was here and gave the City of Hamilton more time to come to a decision. You were one of the vocal councillors when he was here, wanting to know exactly what are the proposals we're dealing with. Instead of carte blanching a casino somewhere downtown, you're one of the vociferous ones who said, I need to know certain things before, so I can make an informed decision.
And that's been the frustrating part of it. There's no sense of where the casino would go or how much revenue would come to the City of Hamilton. Toronto's got lots of different options that we've all been reading about in the paper, you know, Globe and Mail and whatnot. And Hamilton has no details whatsoever as to what it would look like. Fundamentally, though, Doug, I don't think Hamilton needs a casino. This place is just rocking these days. You go downtown and there's all kinds of things going on. The new hotels and the you know, the places like Supercrawl and the McMaster Family Medicine going downtown. So I think you've got to take a step back and say, you know, is Hamilton, does it need a casino at this point in its economic evolution? And I don't think so. I think we're doing great without a casino. All kinds of problems with a casino, social ills and other things. And I absolutely don't think we need one at this point.
I would think that if the City Council in Toronto decides to go ahead with a $1.4 billion redevelopment downtown, including the Convention Centre, it's a moot point to have a casino in Hamilton between Niagara Falls and Toronto. It just wouldn't seem to make any sense at that point. But at least the debate is going on, and I'm looking at two sides of this debate and understanding all of it. It's just good to see that a lot of citizens are coming forward on this.
Yeah, just like anything else in Hamilton, people do engage, which is the beauty of this city. People don't just say, well, you know, leave it up to the province or leave it up to the politicians. They'll let us know, and we're all the better for that.
One-way conversion. Boy, there's another good one to talk about.
Yeah.
You and Councillor Farr were pushing in September for what some people called some extreme or radical movement from one-way to two-way. And there was pushback at council and at GIC, especially led by the mountain councillors at that point in time, wondering what's the rush and what's the impact for everyone, let alone wards 1, 2, and 3. There is a public meeting coming up next week. Out of that council meeting, there did come a structure to move forward and discuss at least the conversion issue.
That's right, and that was the positive part of it. The councillors did sort of map out a way forward, and it's really up to Councillor Farraway and myself to engage the Ward 1, the Ward 2 public in some of the specific streets that we're talking about to look at what the options are. And we decided to begin the focus on Queen Street on the Ward 1, Ward 2 border, and Cannon Street in Councillor Farr's area, where there's been a lot of discussion about one-way, two-way. We may need to look at Bay Street as well, Queen and Bay, you know, with that twinned street concept, the James John idea. And we begin that discussion with the public on Monday at 7 p.m. in council chambers. And really, to me, it has to be a much different style of study than we've done in the past. You know, the whole idea, if you do things the same way, you know, definition of insanity, expect different results. And we really need to provide the public with all the traffic data, all the information they need to make the decision. Don't let the consultants get in the way. Sometimes city staff, and I don't mean to be critical, but they've got a perspective which tends towards status quo and pro-car. And a lot of folks are concerned about the pedestrian interests in cycling as well.
I've slowly but surely been, and maybe it's Graham Crawford's writings that have slowly but surely opened my eyes to the potential of conversions to two-way. I'm still a person who believes that King and Main need to be one-way streets to move the marketplace literally across the city, just because of our geography. But Cannon could be turned into something quite brilliant. It could turn into a very walkable area. And I know there are lots of very informed and intelligent young people who are writing about the kind of city they'd like to see, and not the kind of city necessarily that I've lived in. It's time for new ideas, and it's time for new pushes by certain people. So Cannon I'm open to. It'd be intriguing to see what the stats are regarding Queen Street, because it impacts the West Mountain, where I live, with how that is going to work. And it'd be interesting to see how Bay works out as well, especially with all the development that is going on in that specific corridor right now. So there are intriguing ideas and options out there for us.
Yeah, and
what kind of timeline is there as we begin this process?
Yeah, I would think over the next year we're going to have a decision as to what to do with those streets that we're talking about. That would be our goal. And you look at Queen Street, I think there could be some real positives from the mountain to come down off the mountain, Queen Street Hill, and to carry on down to Main Street and make a right-hand turn to go downtown, or to carry on all the way down to King Street and make a left-hand turn off to the 403 or Westdale or McMaster University, which a lot of the destinations. That traffic light at Aberdeen is horrendous, as you know. You well know, Doug, from your experience. It's just way over capacity. So if we provide more options for the mountain commuters, that's got to be a good thing.
I've got to keep working on you about that three-way at Aberdeen and Dundurn, though, but we'll leave that for another time.
All righty.
When is that lane going to be back in operation? The condos took a little while to get going, but they're almost done. How far away are we?
Almost done. It's been a bit of a moving target. So
yes.
We're told it'll be out of there by next week, and then next week comes. The latest is by the end of November at the very latest, so we'll hold them to that.
All right. One other thing, transportation-wise, and it goes hand in hand with our whole discussion about conversion from one to two-way, and that's LRT. And I guess I can say it, I'm a proponent, I believe in it, but it's going to be a costly option for the city of Hamilton because there will be costs for us. It is a provincial Metrolinx initiative, and they're going to bear a lot of the cost. But we're going to be involved in that. And Brian, I keep getting the sense that LRT goes to the back burner and then it warms up a little bit and moves forward, and now it seems to be moving back. And I get the sense that even next year we're not going to be having a heavy LRT debate. So what is your sense of where we're going with this, considering we have a provincial government that currently is pretty much in limbo?
Right. Well, we're actually preparing a report to council for probably mid-January or late January by the time it gets to council. And that'll be the final design for LRT in Hamilton. So all the details, how it's going to look and why, and and all those sorts of things will be in place at that point. So council will have a chance to look at the final report, and the intent would be to send that off to Metrolinx and to the province of Ontario, saying here's Hamilton's proposal.
Well, that doesn't sound like the main burner, but it sounds like the other front burner.
Yeah,
that's moving along. It
is moving along, and then of course the trick is to get the funding for it, and if we're talking about a $900 million project or something along those lines, which was earlier numbers that we saw, we're going to have to look at a local contribution to match the province and hopefully to match the federal government. Just this week I had the first meeting of the LRT task force at the Chamber of Commerce, which I've joined along with Councillor Farr and Ferguson, and we had the governance subcommittee, or rather the government relations subcommittee. You know, how are we going to tackle the province to put Hamilton on the hot list to receive funding before Mississauga, before Durham, before some of these other GTA municipalities. So that work with the Chamber is just beginning as well. So I'm pretty enthusiastic.
Now, when you're in the back offices, the councillors' offices, I mean, what is the general feeling now about LRT? Because there had been some concern that at the very head of council, the mayor wasn't exactly enthusiastic about LRT. Where are councillors' heads at? Because there are going to be nodes of transportation linked with this LRT all across the city. Where is everybody at? Knowing that it's going to be costly, but is there a general favorable feeling towards LRT?
I think there is general support. We've seen that from council before. What everybody's hung up on is the, you know, $900 million or $1 billion, whatever that number ends up being, and where does that money come from, given our other challenges in Hamilton. You know, if we're up for 1/3 of that, if that's how, you know, a lot of these funding mechanisms are 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, $300 million, where do we find that in our capital budget? And of course, not money we need to find right away. It would be probably a 10, 12-year implementation period. So you're looking at that money spread over that decade or more. But that's the discussion we need to have. I don't think you're going to see that in the 2013 capital budget. We've got other priorities at this point. So that's a discussion that you'll start to see in the 2014 capital budget discussion. So it's just a little bit concerned about the funding and where the heck it's going to come from.
We have some other big ticket items that are coming down the pipe, from sanitation to you name it. Excuse me. And Chris Murray, the city manager, basically laid it out that unless other levels of government take a close look at Hamilton, within 10 years perhaps, we're not going to be sustainable because of the infrastructure challenges we have ahead of us. I saw another number today where the property tax is still carrying 85% of the taxation, and your budget in the city of Hamilton is still based on the property tax. And no matter how good the times they appear to be, we're not really making a dent in that number. And then I read that our MPs, MPPs, and city councillors and the mayor had a fairly positive meeting on Friday, taking a look at Hamilton as a particular case, that there are possible synergies between all three levels of government to take care of that infrastructure deficit. What were your feelings about that when you started reading that and hearing from your colleagues? I mean, it's long overdue that we finally got MPs and MPPs to come and listen to us.
Right, and it's hard to gauge really what that really means at this point in time. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been making the case right across the country that we need those infrastructure dollars to replace our aging infrastructure, particularly in older cities like Hamilton. That's critical. I mean, but the federal government really is the big problem, because there's no national housing strategy, there's no national transit strategy. You look at all the other countries in the G8, and they've all got that kind of leadership at the federal level. There's no national poverty strategy, for example. And now with the province being in prorogue, it's a little bit concerning as to where things are going to go ahead. But that also provides an opportunity as well. They're a lot more attentive these days, because there's folks running for the Liberal leadership, and there'll be a budget in the spring, and then there'll be election in May or June, we suspect. So it's a good time for Hamilton to ask for these things. We really need a tripartite agreement, the same way as Vancouver's downtown east side has, Winnipeg has, where all three levels of government come to the table and commit to a long-term process for funding this kind of stuff.
Consultation is a great word, and we're starting to see it with those levels. You've been doing it in Ward 1 with your constituents, with your area rating money. And you mentioned that the last time you appeared on this show. What is the progress? And just for those who don't know, this is not something that's citywide. Some councillors, again, chatting with their constituents in various groups, are allotting the money basically on their own. Some are doing that, some are doing it with councils and neighborhoods input, but you seem to be the most, can I use the word radical?
Sure.
You really have a lot of community involvement.
Progressive, radical.
Progressive, radical, I think they're all synonymous sometimes, aren't they?
They could be.
Update us on what's going on. I know you wanted to talk about this.
Participatory budgeting
Absolutely.
process. So we looked at what's gone on in Brazil in the past, and New York City has done some exciting work. And we have this $1.2 million to allocate through the area rating funding. So instead of just doing that on our own, we did go out, set up a website and ask people for their projects. And then we put those projects back up on the website and had people vote. So we just received the results of that voting and the final details last week. So we've got about 15 or 20 projects where we'll be funding in 2013, or some of them partially funding, because some of them are quite huge projects. And we're not going to be able to get the whole project done. But we set aside money to save each year as well for some of the larger projects. Lock Street North Pedestrian Bridge, about $7 million. It's going to take a while to save for that. But I was really excited because the number one project was the school nutrition project. $80,000 towards schools in Ward 1 and throughout Hamilton to contribute to making sure kids are fed at school and can focus on their schoolwork. And of all the projects to come to the fore, to the head of the list, I was really happy to see that one.
Well, that's got to be one of those very gratifying projects.
It certainly is.
Because you will see results.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, it's very important to kids in this city.
Now, the concentration level, how did that go for you? Because again, I mentioned that some councillors are doing it on their own. Is this, the participatory, how many nights of Brian McHattie's life was that? But what is the feedback you're getting from community? Because it's an entirely different experience.
It is, and it's the first time we've done it. So I think there's probably people out there still wondering, is this for real? Is they actually going to take my my comments for seriously? So I think we ended up with about 500 folks participating actively in the process and actually voting on which projects they wanted to see go ahead. There was about 10 meetings of a advisory committee that I put together to design the process and put together the website and the nuts and bolts of it. And that'll be better next year because we know what we're doing to some extent. And we've got a meeting next week to sort of go over what we learned and how to improve for next year. So I fully anticipate we'll double the number of folks that are involved next year. I understand Councillor Farr in Ward 2 is also launching a process next year as well, which is exciting to see.
Now let's get over to Dundurn, if we could, near the LCBO and the Brewers. Some of my favorite stops. I know where all of them are across the city of Hamilton.
Right.
There is a monster of brick that has been sitting there, and I've got to say empty for at least 12 years, going on 15.
Yeah.
And there have been proposals before, and developers have looked at it before. Can you tell me briefly, because we've got under 2 minutes, but what might be happening at 220 Dundurn? What was it? What might it be?
Yeah, so that's an old school board warehouse building once upon a time. It's kind of a nice old building if you look beyond the blight that it currently is. It's the biggest eyesore in Ward 1, there's no question about it. And on a street that is very active, people see it all the time. So what's happened is Dennis Vranich here in town, a developer in town, owns the building, has owned it for the last couple of years, and has plans now. And we're still waiting for the final detailed plans, so I'm about 80% sure on this, to use the existing building and go up a couple of floors for luxury rental accommodation, so residential development at that property. And I think if that happens, and again, I'm about 80% sure that it is going to happen, we're waiting for a site plan application. I think that's going to have a huge impact on turning Dundurn Street around in general, and seeing other positive improvements on Dundurn.
And one of the nice things, along with the Witten Lofts, is we are seeing developers looking at potential, especially old school board properties, and going up a couple of floors, but utilizing those historic structures, which are still great structures. They just needed a new life to them. So it's exciting to see these kinds of things happening in Hamilton.
Well, that's for sure. Stinson School is
Absolutely.
one of those, and there's Dundas District with the Valdesori brothers who did Allenby School, of course, once upon a time, about a decade ago. They're starting in Dundas, and there's other ones being talked about, Delta and some of the East End. Beautiful old schools, so we're hoping that carries on.
Right across the city. It's happening, folks. Thanks to Councillor Brian McHattie. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks very much, Doug.
Thank you very much. Come back soon.
Indeed.
That is the Council edition for Wednesday, November the 21st. We return in 2 weeks with Ward 2 Councillor Jason Farr. I'm Doug Farraway, and thank you for watching.